From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the program. Friends or foes, from rubbing shoulders with royalty to courting EU leaders, what Donald Trump wants from a European visit. Left heads right, Denmark's Social Democrats adopt tough anti-immigration ideas as Danes head to the polls. Cutting carbon, Finland's bold new environmental pledge as it gets ready to take over the EU presidency. Colorblind, the problem with diversity and the new European Parliament, according to a new report. And wish you weren't here. Protesters welcome the U.S. president in tonight's Raw Moment. It is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. Hi, Darren. So what are you watching?
Well, the Parliament today is heaving with new MEPs arriving to try and take up those seats. But you know what? And we've been talking about this really since Raw Politics started, about the lack of diversity in this place. It's got better, but not a hell of a lot better, particularly when it comes to race. Only 5%
like
of MPs of people of colour. It's pretty bad.
Well, we'll talk about that a little later on. And we also have joining us Geoffrey Van Orden. He's a British MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformists. What about you? What are you watching tonight? What story are you looking at closely tonight?
Well, of course, I'm very interested, of course, in what's happening with Trump. Very successful visit, I think, to the United Kingdom. And we're delighted to welcome him. And it's a pity that too much attention is being given to all these protesters and demonstrators. They represent a very minority view, I think.
OK, we'll get into that a little later also. And joining us, Christine Berzina. She's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. What about you, Christine?
I am looking at Trump on this side of the Atlantic, as well as Pompeo, who is in Germany. So we have two different American acts in Europe this week. How do they go together? How are they apart?
Absolutely. It's been a big American week, actually. So that's where we're starting tonight, because the U.S. President, Donald Trump, he is wrapping up his official state visit to Britain. And on the last day of his trip, Trump joined the Queen and other world leaders in Portsmouth to mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Now, the French Emmanuel Macron, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel were among the guests to observe the commemoration. And after the event, Mr. Trump, he headed to Ireland for a meeting with the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. All right, the U.S. president, he met with the British Prime Minister Theresa May yesterday, and the two leaders discussed a variety of issues, including the Chinese tech giant Huawei, trade, and, of course, Brexit. Let's take a look.
As the UK makes preparations to exit the European Union, the United States is committed to a phenomenal trade deal between the U.S. and the UK. There is tremendous potential in that trade deal. I say probably 2 and even 3 times of what we're doing right now. Tremendous potential. So I know Boris. I like him. I've liked him for a long time. I think he'd do a very good job. I know Jeremy. I think he'd do a very good job. I don't know Michael. But would he do a good job, Jeremy? Tell me.
I seem to remember the President suggested that I sued the European Union, which we didn't do. We went into negotiations and we came out with a good deal.
Yeah, that's not such a... I would have sued, but that's okay. I would have sued and settled, maybe, but you never know. She's probably a better negotiator than I am, Jeremy.
Well, there you go. I think he pretty much threw out the diplomatic rule book. He's just wading into domestic issues there. So he wants to play Brexit kingmaker. You were positive about Trump's visit. What is he doing? Is he trying to win allies? What wading into the Brexit debate and siding with hard Brexiteers?
Well, I'm very enthusiastic about the President of the United States coming to the United Kingdom and visiting other parts of Europe as well. I think this is most important. They are our biggest strategic and economic partners, so it's important. Yes, you're quite right. The personality of Donald Trump isn't everybody's cup of tea. He has a different style of politics. He's deliberately provocative. He knows how to get a rise out of people. You have to recognize that. And I have to say that a lot of what he's done, he's stirred people up and got them thinking afresh about many of the problems that we have to deal with, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
So why side with, let's say, in the UK, it's the hard Brexiteers, and he's coming here at a time when what you call Trumpian populism is on the rise. some would say that he is looking for allies in Europe at this moment, which he needs to further U.S. foreign policy. Is this what he's doing?
Trump has been Mr. Brexit since before he was elected. And so I think the fact that he is taking part in the Brexit conversation and the fact that he has strong preferences for candidates is just part of his style. He's looking for allies across Europe, but he's looking for allies also on policy positions that are important to the United States. And so I think it's not so much that he's here to have a personality chummy process with individuals so much as he's here really to get his own international agenda passed, to talk about a trade deal, which is important to him as a trade being one of his major policy priorities, and also some security concerns, which is where the Huawei conversation comes in, which is something that's on his agenda right now with the United Kingdom, and also that Pompeo has in his speaking points in Germany.
Is that why it would be easier to get the UK on side rather than, I mean, he's meeting Merkel, Macron, he met the Queen, the Taoiseach. Is it easier to get just the UK on side? And how is the dynamic with the rest of Europe?
I mean, I think to a common degree there is this special relationship with the UK that has dated back for centuries to a large degree. I think when it comes to Brexit, you know, Donald Trump views Brexit as essentially the same kind of populism wave that led to him getting elected, and that is why he's dreadfully keen on Brexit. And it's clear that he has taken a position that he wants Brexit to be delivered and that he has essentially come out for candidates, most of whom seem to be potentially leaving or willing to leave with no deal if it comes to it in the end on October 31st. I think what is also interesting is that I agree, Donald Trump, bizarrely, in having to deliver his core message, which is America first, has actually realised in having to deliver America first, you actually need international allies.
Right.
And Huawei is the perfect example of that. Huawei, yes, America will argue, and there may well be concerns about security, but ultimately it's about trying to protect American industry and American hegemony when it comes to technology around the world. And what Donald Trump has now realised is if he wants to ensure that, he needs to get Europe on side to block Huawei, or else Huawei could potentially be a threat to the US. So I think he has realised that ultimately his presidency cannot be an isolated island away from the rest of the world.
And just very quickly, so they can't really ignore Trump here in Europe, can they? Or do they need a lot more Trump?
Of course they can't ignore Trump, which is why the European Union...
Or do you need more Trump here?
We need the American president on the side, and that American president is Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is highly likely to be re-elected as American president. Of course, we need a good, strong, positive relationship. None of these sort of snide comments.
What I don't understand is, and we've heard this lots of the last few days, and I'm sure it'll play out in Europe over the next few days as well, is that people say we have to have respect for the institution, for the presidency of the President of the United States, not necessarily the person.
Right.
My question is, what would Donald Trump have to do to undermine even the institution? How far would he have to go where you say, I'm sorry, that's too much? Because I don't know where that line is.
Well, you know, if he was to take his trousers down on public television or something like that, that might be a line. Otherwise, we know he's very outspoken.
People would always say he has crossed it with his comments about women, with his demonization, people would say, of Mexicans, that he has already crossed that line.
Well, the people of the United States have elected him as their president. And the United States is a great democracy. And occasionally people come along that aren't to everybody's taste. We have to recognise that.
And everyone on his side of the government, they're all touting the great relationship between the two, the EU and the US. I mean, you spoke to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, didn't you?
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary when you look at the long list, and it's not just Huawei, it's the Paris Climate Accords, it is Iran. It's a potential trade war. There's a whole list of differences between the EU and the US. And yet, as you say, when I spoke to Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, earlier on this week in The Hague, he made it clear that things were pretty dandy.
I think it's fantastic relations. I hear folks talk about the stress and strain. I meet with my European partners constantly. There are always, in American history and European history, there's always disagreements.
Do you think President Trump then was wrong to refer to Europe as a foe? As an enemy?
I think what President Trump meant there was there's places where we think the United States economy has not been treated fairly. You know, we can't sell our agriculture products in most countries inside the European Union, and yet the European Union can sell their products into the United States. That's not fair. That's not reciprocal.
Brexit is clearly damaging to the European Union. Is it in some ways that you're supporting Brexit because it does damage to the EU.
Well, Brexit was a decision made by the people of the United Kingdom. As you'll recall, there was a referendum where the people of that sovereign nation voted. So this isn't about some American decision. This was a fundamentally democratic decision.
President Trump has talked about trade deals and wanting to sign a trade deal as quickly as possible.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Is a trade deal now with the UK a greater priority than one with the EU?
Well, we've got to see how Brexit proceeds and how that timing goes. But yes, it's a priority for us.
All right, well, you can watch Darren's full uncut interview with the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at 2050 CT. That's 10 minutes to 9 p.m. tonight on Euronews. So I'd like to ask you, Christine, that, you know, the visit here came on the back of harsh comments against the EU because of difference in policy on Iran, on climate change, as Darren was saying. Is there a shift that you notice in their rhetoric and this softening of stance? Oh, now we're all friends.
Between
the US and the EU, is there a shift? Because there was kind of strong language when it came to policy on Iran or even on climate change.
There will always be strong language from Washington to Europe at this time. That is what Washington wants to signal, that it is strong and it won't simply go along with everyone else for the purpose of going along with everyone else. And so the one thing to be expected from Washington is occasional barbs to a prickly attitude in order to really drive a point home. But that doesn't mean that Washington is fundamentally opposed to the European Union.
So there's no softening that we've seen during this visit. It's just
I think
normal.
we've seen. I mean, this visit fundamentally commemorates D-Day. Right?
Okay.
And so if you look at what President Trump is here for, is to commemorate really the United States coming to help Europe in a way that cost lives and really change the course of the continent. And so if you consider this visit in the context of that, not simply something about trade deals, but about the joint efforts that the U.S. and Europe have done, then of course it's a softening of rhetoric. It's commemorating something that is so essential to the transatlantic relationship, and something, in spite of all the barbs that have been thrown across, across the two sides in the last few years, the security relationship is strong. The commitment to each other throughout NATO is valid, and the D-Day celebrations are a part of that vein.
But when it comes to foreign policy, where there are differences, just very quickly, who do you think has a bigger advantage between the two at this point? Regardless of rhetoric, I mean, who can actually hold their ground more?
The United States.
Still, they call the shots.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes. I mean, the European Union...
Does it have credibility?
Only plays at foreign policy. And President Trump, like many world leaders, they prefer to deal with sovereign nations. They're not used to dealing with these peculiar sort of international organizations, such as the EU. I can see that with
Is there
others.
credibility?
It must
I
be
mean,
added, though, I think, the United States is now essentially involved in the trade war with China.
Right.
They're trying to open, or Donald Trump is a second one with Mexico by increasing tariffs. The Republicans in Congress are not happy with this, concerned that this may have a big economic impact ahead of next year's election, and they are talking about essentially overriding Trump's decision. So I think, you know what, even those within his party, even those who have supported him through thick and thin over the last few years are starting to get concerned that Trump is overstretching himself a little too.
All right.
He's a high roller, though.
High roller.
Which has not worked out terribly well in his business
Okay.
in certain things.
Well, Donald Trump's visit, it has attracted a lot of attention from the media, no less, the politicians, and of course, protesters. And much of it has been playing out on social media. Rosie Wright and our team in theCUBE have been taking a look at that side of the story.
Donald Trump, the US president, said on his first day that any protests were fake news. He said on his second day there'd been hardly any. And as he reaches his third, let's look back at what happened. The presidential envoy driving round here in the centre of London. And as the camera pans right, you see waiting, bobbing, looking at him there is the Trump baby blimp. He seems undeterred, though. This morning he tweeted, "I kept hearing there'd be massive rallies against me in the UK, but it was quite the opposite. The big crowds, the corrupt media hates to show, were those that gathered in support of the USA and me." Well, some crowds did gather. The UK leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, actually greeted them using the hashtag #TrumpProtest. He said, "We won't ignore the refugee crisis," and indefinitely a pointed attack to the president. He said, "We're standing against those who treat them as enemies." What about the current leader of the United Kingdom, Theresa May? Sharing this video from the number 10 Twitter account, she said, as leaders prepare prepared to gather here across the world. She talks about the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. And of course, Donald Trump has been tweeting about that potential trade deal. Leader of the Brexit party, Nigel Farage, of course, friend of Donald Trump, has got positive things to say. Good meeting with him. He really believes in Brexit and is loving his trip to London. Well, some Londoners were certainly enjoying greeting him as well. This isn't the only bigger-than-life-size figurine of Trump that's been making its way around the capital. This on the way to Trafalgar Square. And also some other perhaps unflattering, well, definitely unflattering projections to meet the president as well. You can see there, led by Donkeys, the political activist group, saying, just so you know, you're wildly unpopular here in Britain. Sad. People really don't like you. Donald Trump seems to be undeterred by all of this, as Nigel Farage says. He seems to be enjoying his stay, despite the fact that opposite the US Embassy, this banner is up, Resist Trump. Well, his third and final day comes. He is just totally ignoring protests and getting on with the job. He, of course, is continuing to say they're just fake news.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, the fact that he sees it, but then he just goes the other way and ignores it. I mean, curious to know what goes on in his mind.
Donald Trump is unpopular with a significant portion of the United States. It's not especially unusual for him to be faced with protests. Donald Trump, in particular, is opposed to many values that are held dear, especially
so he just
on this
doesn't
side of
see
the
it.
Atlantic. He sees it. Does it bother him?
I think ultimately, you know, what we saw in the UK was a protest of indifference.
Sure.
I mean, there was a couple of thousand people on either side. Most people really didn't give a too damn
because it was less than before. All right, well, now, as Donald Trump meets his European counterparts in the UK, there's another team of allies who are meeting in Russia. China's Xi Jinping arrived in Moscow for a 3-day visit, which includes top-level talks with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, marking the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations. And the two governments are intent on strengthening their political ties in the face of increased political and economic pressure from the United States. All right, this is, interesting as we see the two sides, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I've always argued we need the solidarity of the democracies because the great threat in the future is that there's going to be a combination of the autocracies. And we criticize people that have different views to ourselves in our own systems. But my goodness, there are different systems out there. Mm-hmm. And this is where I think we need real solidarity.
Will China and Russia and cozying up together really significantly change anything, to be very frank?
I think it's a sign of something to be really worried about, which is the rise of illiberalism. We see here an authoritarian brotherhood forming, right? This is something that is a counterpoint to what we see.
Well, what's wrong with protecting
their
interests against what they see as just deferring interests from the other side of the world?
My point about this, no, I'm not denying that potentially an alliance between Russia and China is
something to be worried
threat
about.
Potentially to Western values. What I would say is that the actions actually of the President of the United States, despite his bluster and despite his kind of talk about reconciliation, actually his actions have pushed China and Russia together. He's involved in a trade war with China. Despite saying he wants to reach out and having talks with Putin, the American government is still quite agonistic towards Moscow. And so in those circumstances, it is probably not a surprise that geopolitically, Moscow and Beijing have decided to try and act together. That is not to say that China is a real threat to Russia, not least of all to its own land borders in the very Far East, where a burgeoning Chinese population are increasingly moving into Russian territory. So it's not to say they're on the same page on everything, but clearly this is potentially a threat to the West, but one that the West may well have created itself.
There's that point that it has created this threat, but at the end of the day, doesn't America still have most of the ammunition to call the shots in the world? I don't know. Is that a fair assessment or not?
I don't think this is just about America. I think it's about the ruling, the democratic systems and the values that we held in Europe and in the United States, as opposed to systems that have completely different views about how things should run and what power means, which means that it's incumbent on us actually to have good visits this week commemorating D-Day to show that we are strong and we are together.
I mean, if anything, it's really quite an interesting power play, these two things happening on the opposite sides of the world. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, it is being called one of the most ambitious environmental politics in the world. We look at Finland's new plan to fight climate change. Plus, no one protested Donald Trump's visit to the UK. That's according to, well, Donald Trump. We dissect the president's latest fake news claim. That's coming up. welcome back to Raw Politics. Denmark's centre-left party, the Social Democrats, could be on the verge of a comeback, racing ahead in the polls as the country votes in today's general elections. Well, the party is widely expected to surpass both support for the far-right Danish People's Party and the centre-right government of the now current Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, while setting the stage for a left-leaning government. So when polling opened earlier today, this woman there set to take the lead. Denmark's youngest ever could be the Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, and pushing her centre-left party further to the right. She's campaigned on hardline anti-immigration policies and promises to protect the welfare system. But while it seems to have resonated with voters, human rights campaigners believe that a universal shift in rhetoric has led to a rise in racist abuse and discrimination. All right, here with us in the studio is Karin Axelsen. She's EU correspondent for DR, that's the Danish Broadcasting Corporation. We also have joining us Kate Bolongaro, an EU affairs journalist specializing in migration, and still with us, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. All right, what's interesting happening in Denmark, we say it is a shift to the left, a left-leaning government, Social Democrats, but is it really? Because they're campaigning on an anti-immigration rhetoric, which is, you know, they were the spotlight for taking the rhetoric of the far right.
You're right. Yeah, that's true.
So this is not actually a move to the left.
No,
what
you
is
couldn't
it?
say. For the last many elections, the Social Democrats have lost the elections because of the immigration question. So they have actually, as a consequence of that, taken the party to the right and leaned towards the Danish People's Party, saying they would be willing to cooperate with them and embracing their politics. Mm-hmm. They have done that for the last couple of years, and it turns out it has worked. And we have also seen this, these two new parties in Denmark, two far-right parties coming into the stage with their very, very far-right messages about deporting people, mm-hmm. which I think actually has scared a lot of center-right, center-left voters to actually say, okay, we need a different rhetoric as well.
So right-wing extremism, if you could call that, well, it is alive and well in Denmark. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, alive and well is probably a big statement, but
okay.
You have seen these two parties because they have been actually able to gather enough signatures to run for the parliament. And since mm-hmm. we have a threshold of 2%, they could actually enter the parliament.
But what's interesting is why is it that it seems that anti-immigration rhetoric, regardless of where left, right, center you are, it seems to be the one that is winning the votes, and this is what politicians are leveraging on. I mean, is this where we are now in European politics?
I do think so, actually. This is ushering in a new era, we could say, of left-wing politics and how the left wing and a lot of Social Democrats have lost votes across EU and across the different countries. And now they're picking up from these far-right, more extremist rhetorics towards immigrants and minorities, and they're using that to capitalize on that and get themselves back into power as sort of a catapult, we could say. And I do think that this is something that Europe is going to have to contend with, is more and more of these anti-immigrant tones.
Can we even call that left? I mean, we have cap on non-Western immigrants, advocating for potential repatriation on asylum seekers to North Africa, obligatory work for all immigrants, plans to outlaw the burqa and niqab. I mean, there's so many things that just is confusing now. Which ideology does it?
Jewelry off.
It's taking jewelry off of them, exactly.
I think it's too simplistic to say that this election in Denmark simply comes down to the issue of immigration.
Okay.
I mean, there is a fight back against austerity and a protection of the welfare state that is playing on minds, Danish voters' minds. I think in addition to that, clearly the issue of climate change, which has gone way up in people's concerns in Denmark, mm-hmm. is again feeding into, I think, support for the Social Democrats. That is not to say that, of course, that a left-wing government is guaranteed, because actually many on the left are saying they're unwilling to work on this unless the Social Democrats compromise on this issue of migration and they roll back slightly. We could see a grand coalition, which Rasmussen was talking about. What I would say, though, and we are seeing this narrative, that Social Democrats have consistently lost out in Europe over the last decade or so on this issue of migration. They have not known how to deal with it.
Right.
In many regards, the right have managed to capture it and exploit it. And I think what they've now realised is that actually many of their traditional voters, the working class voters, are not on the same page, have been affected by it, and they're now having to adopt to a degree, understandably, their voters' concerns.
Sure. We can't really just condense it into one issue. All right, let's get more insight now, because joining us fresh from voting is a Danish MEP Morten Løkkegaard. Morten, he's from the same party as the current Prime Minister Lars Rasmussen, and he's a vice chair of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats group here at the European Parliament. Thanks for joining us. So how worried are you about this potential win for the Social Democrats and for the kind of platform that they are seeming to get more votes on? Are you worried?
Yes, I'm a bit worried because what the Prime Minister has said is that we are not supposed to be dependent on the extreme parties. That's to say, left or right. So that's why he suggested this work together in the center of politics. But as it seems now, we are losing power on the right wing, and we are looking into a phase where we can have a lot of trouble getting a government which can actually be based on a solid ground. So there's a reason for worrying, yes.
But they are winning, getting votes, but then that also means that your party, you're losing. What are you doing wrong? What are you not doing in the country that's making people just leave and go somewhere else?
Actually, I'm still. I have hopes that we can actually get a few votes more than we are used to. So it's not that we are not winning as a party, but our government, our parliamentary majority is shrinking, and I think that's because we have these right-wing populists that are threatening us from the far right. And this is tendencies that we have all over Europe, and now we also have it in Denmark, and we have not been able to get rid of it. It's a new phenomenon in Denmark that we have parties so far right that
but the question there is because they are all because
to work with them.
Yeah, the rhetoric that they're pushing forward, the immigration issue does come up quite often. Immigration has been an issue in Denmark for the last couple of years. It's not something that just came out. What is different now in regard to that debate?
Yeah, well, it's of course it's rhetoric, but it's also politics. I mean, we are looking at people that actually want to deport hundreds of thousands of people, of Danish citizens from Denmark. We are talking about people with openly racist views. We're talking about neo-Nazis, types like that, and we are not used to that. At least not parties that are actually suitable for elections. So that's a new situation here.
Okay, thank you for that, for joining us there, just right outside the voting center there. All right, so what's interesting in what he's saying, he's like talking about the far-right parties that are coming up, as you were saying. Is it time to redefine what a Danish Social Democrat is?
Well, she'll have to redefine, because you'll also have a hard time. Even if she wins tonight, she has asked for a minority government. She still has to depend on the parties on the left, which have also gained a lot of, seems like they're gaining a lot of votes because of this fear of the far right surge. And also, as you mentioned, the climate change has been it's been the biggest topic for the last generation. It's been migrations, now it's been climate change. So she will have a hard time, gathering a majority to find her own way towards, because the left parties...
So the Grand Coalition is something that's entirely possible here?
No, she said no to that.
Okay.
Yeah. But she has the problem that the left parties, they don't agree with her migrant policies. And especially the Social Liberal Party, which is actually Margrethe Vestagers' party, the competition commissioner, they are put to have maybe a role as the kingmaker party, and they definitely don't share this policy. So she'll have to find some way through.
And there's another trend that we're seeing, which, Darren, you've mentioned before in a lot of our coverage, is the backlash to the backlash, which is the fear of the rise of the far right. Is this something we can say is a trend in Denmark as well?
Well, definitely. I do think in Denmark we have seen that already in the European elections, the Danish People's Party fell to 11%. So that was about half of what they got in 2015. So clearly we do see people saying, look, we believe that we should be protecting our welfare state. We believe in identity and being Danish and being part of a community and fairness and equality. But does that mean we're racist? Does that mean that we don't like Muslims or immigrants? Perhaps not. We don't necessarily want it to go that far. We want to take care of people. We want to be part of a community. We want to bring people together and be Danish together. But I think that it's causing Denmark to look at itself and go, how far do we have to go to make people integrate and to make people part of this country?
And just really quickly, because Darren, you're going to go cover the elections. What are you looking out for?
Well, I think just really quickly on a wider point here, which is that if the centre-left is to try and address voters' concerns with migration, they're traditional working-class voters, which means shifting to the right on migration. The problem is, and what we're seeing play out in Denmark, is that then, some people would argue, I'm not saying this myself, would normalise anti-migrant sentiment. And in those circumstances, you will then always see people go further and further extreme.
So everyone has shifted to the right.
Everyone's shifting to the right, which means that then that even normalises even more extreme politics on the far right, which is potentially what we're starting to see in Denmark. And that kind of normalising behaviour of anti-migration, in some ways you cannot outdo it. And so you may end up in a cyclical battle that you don't want to be involved in.
All right. Well, now from Denmark, let's head north to Finland, where climate change is firmly on the agenda. Let's take a look.
It's not your average cabinet meeting. The leaders of Finland's left-leaning coalition government catch a tram together as they outline their new government's program. And in case the tram wasn't a big enough clue, the fight against climate change takes center stage. This Northern European nation is setting itself one of the world's most ambitious targets, to become carbon neutral by 2035. How will they do it? By cutting down on high logging rates as well as the use of fossil fuels, and scaling up clean energy production such as wind and solar power. With Finland set to take over the presidency of the Council of the EU next month, it looks like the country's ambitious climate change policies could be headed to Brussels.
Okay, just very quickly, do you think climate change is surpassing immigration as an issue?
It is.
It is.
It has been as well. As you see, voters mean it is. And the government, all the parties are struggling to find their green shoes. So this will be a very welcome message.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do think so. And
surpassing immigration?
I think that eventually it will to a larger scale. I think we're starting to see that. I think the thing is that people that are pushing for climate change are a lot of students, and some of them can't even vote yet, you know, with the school strike marches, et cetera. And Greta Thunberg in Sweden, you know, she's been really popular in Scandinavia to do that.
All I would say is, yes, maybe in North and West Europe.
But there are many other countries.
In Hungary, it is certainly not. And obviously, as people would point out, you cannot divorce climate change from migration. The two potentially will be very
intertwined. Absolutely. And you can join in this debate. We'll actually be talking about it on your call after the Raw Politics show. So do stay tuned and join in that debate. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, why is the EU politics, why is it so white? A new study has analyzed diversity in the new European Parliament, and it turns out it's not so representative. That's coming up next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, ethnic minorities and people of color will once again be widely underrepresented in the new European Parliament. The European Network Against Racism has analyzed the results from the 28 EU member states following last month's elections, and the findings are clear. Brussels is and will continue to be fundamentally white. Well, the report shows that while racial and ethnic minorities make up at least 10% of the European Union's population, here in the next Parliament, they'll make up only 5%. Approximately 36 of the total 751 elected MEPs, and with people of color specifically amounting to just 4%. All right, also the new parliament will be an improvement on the last, with 40% more diversity, but after Brexit, 20% of that representation will disappear because the UK and its 7 minority MEPs will be leaving the EU. If that does happen. Now, joining me for this discussion is Samira Rafaela. She's a Dutch MEP-elect from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats group at the Parliament. Also joining us, Sajid Karim, a British MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformist group, and Sarah Chandler, the advocacy officer with the European Network Against Racism. Sarah, I'll start with you because of the report that you guys did. So is this surprising?
It's not particularly surprising to see that ethnic minorities and people of colour are underrepresented. This is the case throughout all of the European Union institutions, and so it's an ongoing trend that we see. A little bit of a surprise are that the numbers have increased, which show that maybe voters are more engaged, maybe national parties are taking diversity more seriously. However, a lot of the gains that you've mentioned, they will be rolled back with Brexit if the 7 MEPs of colour that were elected will leave. So that is not a surprise, but it's worrying.
Yeah, and you were one of the few, the British MEPs that we're talking about here. Where is the problem, actually? When you've been here 5 years, where is the problem in the last Parliament that you see carrying over now?
Well, when I first came here back in 2004, some 15 years ago, we've actually seen some improvement since then, but we are such a long way away from having a truly representative chamber reflective of the society that we want to espouse ourselves as representing.
Why?
I think there's a number of reasons, and part of it has just been touched upon, and that is the lack of proactive opportunity creation by political parties. In the United Kingdom, we really have been quite good at making sure, based upon the type of society that we are, that processes are open. That is not the same in other parts of the European Union.
And you were nodding your head when Sarah was listing the potential reasons, which is voters, how they're voting, or the national parties, the people that they're putting up in the list. What about you? Where do you think, you just came fresh from elections, where do you think the problem lies, and what was your experience as you were campaigning?
Yeah, well, one of the most important reasons to me to be active in politics was because I felt like recognition is really necessary. So it is really important for people to see that, okay, these are politicians either looking like me or either addressing the topics that are important to me. So that is one of the most important reasons that I became active in politics. And I think that there is a really big challenge for political parties to first start also with the candidate lists. Make sure that you recruit people that represent the society in the first place so that they can start addressing the topics.
I think there are enough people who want to represent.
Yes, and my experience during the campaign is that I spoke to many people, and they have interest in politics. They do. They raise a lot of questions. They do want to be active. They want to participate. But the thing is that also political parties need to be proactive. They need to reach out. They need to listen. And they need to talk to many different people to understand these many different topics. So yes, political parties need to be proactive, but also start with diverse candidate lists.
And what's interesting in what you mentioned is that it's important for people to feel represented. But what if, let's say, the population, it's still, ethnic minorities are still a minority. So where is a problem in society where, it doesn't mean I'm of color, then I vote for someone of color. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So where is the problem in society?
Well, I think you're completely right to point out that people of colour are not a monolith, and definitely we saw when we looked at the analysis that actually parties across the board are electing and putting forward candidates of colour, so that's really a beneficial thing. But I think one issue that we're talking about is diversity, and that's important, and that is something that we need to advance. The other side, which I think Samira just pointed to, what turns people off is if your party is scapegoating migrants, is promoting Islamophobic sentiments. I mean, we were just talking about Denmark. This is increasingly infringing on the mainstream, and this is one thing that I think is impacting the ability of people of colour to feel represented. It's not just about the faces and the colours of the faces.
What about education and all the other...
I think
or is more politics that you see as a problem?
Education is the part of it, but we also have to pinpoint the power structures that are there.
Yeah, the thing here also is, in the European Parliament, we make laws. We decide about laws. So it is extremely important that we bring in all these different perspectives and that we engage people, because it's about laws impacting lives. And therefore, diversity is so necessary to make sure that you have inclusive
I mean, we talk about this like this is it's important, but here's an interesting survey. It was done by Burson, Cohen and Wolf. It's a consulting firm, and they found that amongst 1,800 stakeholders in Brussels in beyond, 49% said it is time for more ethnic diversity in the Commission. 32% said no, and 19% said they don't know. So 13 plus 19, that is still a substantial number who, well, either say no or don't know if their diversity is needed inside in the Brussels bubble. I mean, that's quite a substantial number. I want to ask you, because the UK is doing pretty well in terms of diversity compared to other member states. What is the EU doing right that other member states are probably not doing in terms of diversity?
Well, I think the will is there. I don't have the impression anymore that there just isn't a willingness to address the issue. There's a recognition that there is an issue that needs to be addressed. What isn't really being worked out is the policy framework as to how we actually make this happen. I mean, there is also a problem with the type of data that is collected at a national level. We don't always have the ability to collate...
In France, you can't collect data.
We don't always have the ability to collate the type of information that we need. But my response to that is just look around you. It's quite clear that our policy needs to be much more proactive than what it has been. And, you know, it really is time that we had a member state that introduced some level of diversity in terms of race into the European Commission. You know, it was a big fight to get some semblance of gender balance there. The next battle really is to try and make sure that we do have, you know, a much more diverse commission and a commissioner coming from at least one of the member states.
Networks like yours are definitely going to put this issue at front and center in this next Parliament session. OK, let's move on over to the Czech Republic now, where Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš is facing huge protests. Let's take a look.
A carnival atmosphere as the sun set over Prague last night. But it was politics that prompted tens of thousands of people to take to the streets of the Czech capital. Their demand? The resignation of Andrej Babiš, a billionaire businessman turned prime minister.
Pojďme ji dneska dotáhnout jakou revoluci od babišismu, zbavme se ho, požadujme jeho deficit, protože toho máme dost.
There's been simmering anger against Babiš here after a police investigation recommended he face trial over allegations that one of his former companies illegally received EU funds more than a decade ago. Allegations which Babiš denies. But there was more bad news for the Prime Minister as a European Commission report leaked to the media found him in breach of conflict of interest rules. It says he maintained ties to businesses he founded which are in receipt of EU subsidies, and concluded that he should return millions of euros. But Prime Minister Babiš hit back.
Kvůli mému střetu zájmu a kvůli mé bývalé firmě má Česká republika vracet nějaké peníze. Já bych chtěl jasně říct, že to není pravda.
Back at the protest, there's defiance.
Jsem spokojený s panem Babišem a to, co on dělá, mně se to nelíbí, tak jsem to přijel vyjádřit.
Organizers say more than 120,000 people turned out, which, if confirmed, would make it one of the largest demonstrations since those which brought down communist rule 30 years ago.
I mean, biggest protest since the late 80s. How big could this get for the Czech Republic, Sajid?
Well, I think actually this is far bigger than the Czech Republic. This really is a power play and a demonstration of whether the strong men of politics can survive. The era is changing. Just before I came, I was reading a new study that is showing that actually people want to see humility in their leaders. The idea that strong men are going to rule the day forever on in. I'm afraid the chapter on that is coming to a close.
That is really, that's a really interesting observation. All right, thank you for that. And we have more coming up on the program. We do want to hear from you, as always, on the topic we were previously discussing, so diversity in the European Parliament. The question is, why is EU politics so white? Well, your call is coming up at 7 p.m. Brussels time. That is after this program, and the contact information is on your screen. You can call us. It's a free phone number, 00800 33337 002, and join the debate using the hashtag #RawPolitics, and our lines are opening soon after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. So tonight there is your call after this program. Do tune in. Stay tuned after our show, Raw Politics. You can call in 7 p.m. Brussels time, 6 p.m. if you are in the UK and Ireland. And so right now we are joined by tonight's co-hosts. We have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. We have Jack Parrick, our correspondent. And still with us now, Kate Bolongaro, an EU policy journalist as well. Okay, Darren. We always ask 3 questions. What are tonight's questions?
Cannot not have a view on tonight's questions, whether there should be more Trump, whether climate change is now important than immigration to you at home, and
why is EU politics so white?
There you go.
Yeah,
okay.
Diversity in politics. Let's have a look. An American offensive. Donald Trump has rubbed shoulders with the British royal family, stood side by side with Theresa May hours after suggesting a Brexit crash out, and despite huge disagreements on climate, trade and China, today he meets EU leaders to celebrate past alliances and current friendship.
I heard that there were protests. I said, where are the protests? I don't see any protests.
His brash style would be politically damaging for many politicians, but it seems to work for him. So could his style work here? Does Europe need more Trump? 10% of the EU's population are ethnic and visible minorities, but when it comes to the European Parliament, it's only half that at 5%. That's according to a new survey by the European Network Against Racism. It means that of the 751 MEPs, 36 are diverse. And that number will drop to just 30 after Brexit as British MEPs leave. We want to know, what do you think? Why is EU politics so white? Europe's green wave. Finland says it wants to go carbon neutral by 2035. Germany says it wants the UN to treat climate change as a security risk. And in Denmark, it barely registered as a concern 4 years ago. But as voters go to the polls today, surveys show that 46% of them rank climate change as their top concern. That compares to just 27% a year ago. What do you think? Does climate trump migration in politics now? So come on, Europe, have your say. Get in on the debate. Does Europe need more Trump? Why is EU politics so white? And does climate trump migration in politics now? And you know what to do. Pick up the phone. It is free. 00800 333 3702. We'd love to hear from you. You can also email us at rawpaul@euronews.com. You can Skype us. Let us see what you look like. Use the handle Raw Politics. Or indeed, if you're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, anything else, hashtag Raw Politics.
All right, one of the questions you were talking about earlier in the show, Jack, you weren't here yet, but does climate trump migration in politics? It's really interesting, isn't it? The green wave that we all talk about.
A huge deal that the Green Party here in the European Parliament has just found out that it's going to get 5 more members. It is a huge issue for voters, but migration has been the vote winner across the European Union over the last few years.
So it's interesting, though, that with climate, it took so many years to push the climate agenda. But now
we're not there yet. I don't think we should get carried away, but it is extraordinary. Ireland said that there's now a climate crisis. The Greens are, according to the latest poll, ahead of the CDU in Germany. They finished 3rd in France. Clearly, they're defining politics in the Netherlands. Sorry, in Finland. But let's not get carried away. Ultimately, of course, you know, climate change is a global phenomenon. Clearly, half of Europe is not on that same page, let alone lots of the rest of the world. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, Putin in Russia,
are we getting
Trump in the United States
carried away?
are not big climate change
But are we?
advocates.
Because you said earlier that it has surpassed migration as a major issue.
I do think that it's becoming a bigger political force, especially among the younger generation. We are seeing kids leaving school and going into the streets, and we have the Extinction Rebellion as well. So I do think it is picking up steam with the Paris Agreement as well that was signed, keeping the warming below 2 degrees. But I do think that migration is going to remain the hot topic for now, because this is where a lot of voters and a lot of the voting population, they're concerned about this, especially with the aftermath of the Syrian refugee and the whole migrant crisis, as they call it, that was hitting Europe in 2015, 2016.
It'll be interesting to see how the debate goes.
There's an age split. A
Yeah.
demographic split on those two issues as well, where older people are more interested in migration, perhaps, and
also
younger people
when
green
Finland
issues.
takes on the EU presidency and brings climate to the forefront, let's see what happens with that. Okay, so you can indeed call us, as Darren said. It is free, 00800 333 3702. Email at rawpaul@euronews.com and use the hashtag #RawPolitics and do join in the debate. So join Jack and Darren tonight. Okay, we have time for tonight's Raw Moment, which comes from London, where there definitely were no major protests against Donald Trump. Let's take a look.
I heard that there were protests. I said, where are the protests? I don't see any protests. I did see a small protest today when I came, very small. So a lot of it is fake news, I hate to say.
Did you guys see a protest?
We did see protesters. I mean, Trump was right and said they weren't very big protests. Right. I mean, compared to last time he was in the UK. But I don't understand why he has to lie or why he's even so thin-skinned. I mean, he admitted earlier on the show he's not that popular in Europe. It shouldn't come as a surprise.
Exactly. Well, we're not Trump, so we wouldn't know. All right, we'd love to hear your views. Don't forget, stay tuned for your call right after this program. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening.